Tonight, we uncover the story of a war so ancient, so hidden, that even time itself tried to forget it. A war not fought with swords and shields, but with silence and memory, between two worlds that could never coexist: Atlantis, the civilization of light, harmony, and knowledge, and Rome, the empire of stone, control, and conquest, one built to understand, the other built to rule. Only one survived in the pages of history. They say Rome conquered the world, but what if that victory began with erasing the one civilization that could have changed everything? The traces of Atlantis were not simply lost beneath the sea. They were buried beneath words, rewritten maps, and altered calendars. The greatest war in human history may not have been for land or power, but for truth itself. And the Church inherited the silence that followed. Those who searched for answers found more than ruins. They found fragments of star maps etched into cathedral walls, symbols of tridents hidden in stained glass, and manuscripts that spoke of engines powered by water and light. Artifacts that did not belong to Rome's timeline, knowledge that defied its empire. But recovering them was never meant to happen, because every clue that surfaced threatened to expose the memory of the world Rome tried to rewrite. Records speak of admirals who vanished, edicts forbidding machines that used starlight, and a fleet erased from history. The Church called them myths. Scholars called them coincidence. Yet, monuments, cathedrals, and forgotten sea charts whisper the same story: that Atlantis never truly died. It was absorbed, renamed, and buried beneath the empire that feared its wisdom most. For centuries, the Vatican's hidden archives have guarded this silence. Documents sealed beneath marble floors, maps redrawn to fit the new world, and ancient tools labelled heretical curiosities. But a few traces escaped: a blank entry in a 17th century index, a bronze tablet pulled from the Atlantic floor, a pattern of cathedrals aligned perfectly with constellations that once guided Atlantean ships. The evidence is there, waiting. Could a forgotten war between Atlantis and Rome have shaped the world we live in? Could the fall of one civilization and the rise of another be part of a single story, one rewritten to make sure only one side was remembered? And if that is true, what did they destroy to protect it? We will not begin with what we were told, but with what we were never allowed to know, because sometimes history is not written in ink or stone. Sometimes it is written in absence, in the silence between truths. And if Atlantis really did face Rome, if that war was ever real, then its echoes still move beneath the surface of our world, waiting for someone to finally listen. They say history begins with Rome, but what if it actually began with what Rome tried to erase? Imagine a war so ancient that even memory trembles to recall it. Not a war of empires, but of worlds. One born from the earth, the other from the sea. Rome, the master of stone and order, and Atlantis, the keeper of light and water. A battle not written in chronicles or carved in marble, but hidden beneath the very foundations of time itself. Beneath the oceans, beneath the cathedrals, beneath the stories we were told to believe. Every civilization leaves behind echoes, broken walls, lost coins, forgotten names. But Atlantis left something different, a silence so heavy it shaped the world that followed. The story goes that long before the first Roman legion marched, a voice rose from the deep. It spoke of harmony between heaven, earth, and water, of power that could move mountains without swords. But Rome, hungry for dominion, feared a world that needed no masters, and so began the war that never was, the one we were never meant to know. Legends say Atlantis fell in one night, a flood, a curse, a punishment from the gods. But what if it wasn't a tragedy at all? What if it was conquest? Imagine Rome facing something beyond its understanding. A people who could bend sound into energy, who mapped the stars before calendars existed, who believed knowledge belonged to everyone. To defeat such a world, Rome wouldn't need armies. It would need control of stories, calendars, and time itself. That's the true battlefield. Not swords and shields, but scrolls and silence. You can still see the traces. A temple built where an Atlantean shrine once stood. A Roman myth that mirrors an older oceanic legend. Even the word empire itself hides the same root as mare, the sea. The victors took not just land, but language. They rewrote the past until the sea itself became a symbol of chaos, something to fear, something to forget. Centuries later, the church inherited Rome's power. It carried its silence like a relic, polishing it, preserving it, expanding it. When explorers sailed west and found ancient ruins that didn't fit the Roman timeline, they called them pagan, primitive, impossible. But they were looking at Atlantis' children, the ones who survived, the ones who remembered. The church closed its doors, the archives grew deeper, and the war continued, fought not with armies, but with ink. Every age since has been built on the same illusion. That time flows forward in a straight line, that history is complete, that everything before Rome was myth. But what if time was edited? What if centuries were added, years rearranged, memories scrubbed? The truth may still sleep beneath the waves, waiting for the silence to crack. Because if Atlantis truly existed, and if Rome truly erased it, then history itself is the spoils of that war. And maybe that's why no one speaks of it, because the greatest battle ever fought wasn't between nations, but between truth and control. A war without graves or dates. A war that never was, yet shaped everything that is. The ocean has always been a keeper of secrets. Beneath its still surface, the past hides like a heartbeat, slow but alive. In the summer of 2023, a diver searching for Roman wrecks near the Azores stumbled upon something no history book could explain. A bronze tablet, green with age, half buried in volcanic sand. Its edges were smooth, its carvings untouched by time. When he brought it to the surface, the sun revealed symbols no one could recognize. Not Greek, not Latin. Constellations etched in spirals and arcs. Stars connected in patterns that didn't match any known sky. At first, the experts dismissed it. A hoax, they said, another trick for fame. But one archaeologist, a quiet scholar from Lisbon, noticed something. In the center of the tablet was a small circular emblem, a stylized eye surrounded by 7 stars. She had seen it before, not in any museum, but in the margin of a Vatican manuscript. The resemblance was perfect, down to the curve of the iris and the number of rays around it. The Vatican copy had no explanation, only a note in faint ink beside it. Symbolum ex mare, prohibitum, the symbol from the sea, forbidden. That word changed everything. The discovery was immediately classified. The diver was asked to stay silent, the artifact taken under protection for further study. But whispers spread fast. A few photos leaked online, grainy and dark, showing the strange constellations glowing faintly when light touched them. Some said the tablet wasn't bronze at all, but an alloy unknown to modern science. Others claimed it hummed when exposed to salt water, like the ocean recognized it. When the coordinates were checked, something else appeared. The site where it was found was exactly halfway between Portugal and the Caribbean, near a ridge long rumoured to be the last trace of Atlantis. The diver swore he saw stone formations nearby, too precise to be natural. Steps, walls, columns, half swallowed by coral. But when another expedition tried to locate them weeks later, the seabed had shifted. The ruins were gone, buried again under silt. In the Vatican, the symbol's connection raised quiet alarm. The archivists knew what it meant. The mark had been found before, centuries ago, on fragments locked in the restricted section of the Apostolic Archive. Records from the 17th century mentioned metallic relics from beneath the Western Sea, and an order to suppress all mention of them. The reasoning given was simple. They contradicted sacred chronology. The archaeologist who made the link vanished from public view soon after. Her university profile was deleted. Her colleagues refused to speak. but one of her notes, saved in an old email draft, survived. It read only 4 words: "It is not Roman." Maybe the bronze tablet wasn't just a relic. Maybe it was a message, a memory from a civilization that once challenged Rome and paid the price for it. Beneath the waves, the silence still holds that story, waiting for someone brave enough to listen, because the ocean forgets nothing. It only hides what the world isn't ready to remember. In the quiet halls of the Vatican Library, there are books no one is allowed to open. Some are wrapped in linen, others sealed in glass, their titles faded or erased. They sit in the corners of the archives, where light feels foreign, where even the air seems to whisper. That was where Father Luca spent most of his life. For 40 years, he copied, catalogued, and protected the written memory of the Church. But when he retired, he decided to tell one story the Church never wanted heard. The story of an entry that was never supposed to exist. It began one winter evening in the year 1989. The archivists were cataloguing 17th century indexes, the lists that recorded what the Church once banned or destroyed. Most were ordinary, names of heretical books, lists of condemned philosophers. But Father Luca noticed something odd, a blank line between 2 entries. No number, no name, just a faint shadow, as if something had been written there long ago and carefully removed. Under ultraviolet light, faint words appeared, burned into the parchment by iron gall ink. De Bello Atlantico, the War of Atlantis. At first he thought it was a joke, some forgotten scholar playing with myth. But when he searched the surrounding volumes, he found the same gap repeated. Whole pages where the numbering skipped, where the ink had been scraped off and rewritten. He traced the handwriting. It belonged to a Vatican censor, active in 1672, a man known for deleting dangerous histories. That censor's private letters still survive. In one of them, he mentions a tale of the Sea Kings and Rome's forgotten war, followed by the phrase "order of silence" under pain of erasure. When Father Luca brought this to his superior, the reaction was immediate. He was told to stop. The pages were removed from his desk and locked away. Days later, his access to the archives was quietly suspended. But before the documents were taken, he made one copy, not of the words, but of the ink's position on the page. A shadow of a shadow, enough to prove that something had once been there. Years later, after he retired, he agreed to speak to a small documentary team researching lost Vatican records. He told them about the blank entry, about the erased words, and about the strange symbol that appeared in the margins of nearby texts, an eye within a circle of stars. When they asked what he thought it meant, he smiled sadly and said, "The sea remembers what the Church forgot." A few months after the interview, Father Luca passed away. The footage was never released. The producer claimed the Vatican contacted the studio and requested the material for review. It was never returned. But one fragment of the recording still exists online, a short clip taken from the raw footage. In it, the old librarian looks into the camera and says, "There was a war before history. Rome won it by making everyone forget it happened." Then he pauses, as if listening to something distant, and adds softly, "But the pages still whisper." In the marble heart of Rome, where senators once argued beneath painted ceilings and the air smelled of oil lamps and sweat, there was a silence that no one could explain. It began in the early years of the empire, around the reign of Augustus, when Rome ruled land from the deserts of Egypt to the forests of Gaul. The empire had enemies everywhere, but one in particular haunted its oldest records, the Sea Kings, a name whispered in a few surviving fragments, then erased from every official history that followed. The Senate mentioned them once, in a decree written on bronze, now lost except for a copy hidden in a private collection. It spoke of those who sail beyond the sunset, keepers of forbidden knowledge. In the surviving archives of the empire, there are hints that Rome faced something it could not explain. A campaign across the Western Ocean, a fleet that vanished, an edict forbidding contact with the islands of the deep. Historians call these phrases poetic or mythic, but the tone of the decrees is cold and bureaucratic. Taxes, trade, and law are listed beside the word mare internum secretum, the secret sea. The phrase appears only once more, scratched into a marble tablet from Pompeii, half buried in ash. When Emperor Tiberius took power, the topic was quietly forbidden. A speech from the Senate floor recorded by Pliny the Elder described a strange debate about foreign rights spreading through the harbour cities. One senator accused a group of sailors of worshipping the lords beneath the waves. Another demanded they be executed for sorcery. The record ends abruptly. The next entry skips to grain imports and theatre repairs, as if the argument never happened. Roman religion absorbed everything: Greek gods, Egyptian cults, Persian fire rituals. But this was different. Whatever the sea kings taught was not adopted, it was erased. The temples near Ostia that once faced the ocean were rededicated inland. Mosaic floors showing star maps and ships were replaced with images of eagles and lightning bolts. Statues of Neptune, god of the sea, were smashed or moved to gardens where no one prayed. Some archaeologists have noticed something strange in early Roman architecture. The oldest coastal forts have a layer of stone that doesn't match local quarries. It's harder, darker, and mixed with volcanic glass. The same material has been found in ruins off the coast of the Azores. When tested, it dates centuries before Rome's expansion. The builders left no names, no inscriptions, only geometry too precise for the time. The Romans reused the stone, but never mentioned its origin. By the 2nd century, all traces of the sea kings vanish from Roman records. Historians later called this period a time of peace, the Pax Romana. But maybe it was peace bought by silence. The empire learned something in those early years, something it decided the world should not remember. Perhaps Rome did not destroy Atlantis with armies. Perhaps it simply buried the story beneath law, architecture, and faith until only echoes remained. And in that silence, an empire was born that ruled not only the land, but the memory of the sea. After Rome's armies conquered the world, its scribes conquered time. When the legions faded and the empire broke into kingdoms, the work of control did not end. It simply changed hands. The new rulers were not soldiers, but monks, masons, and mapmakers. They became the architects of memory. In candlelit rooms, they decided what was worth remembering and what would vanish into the shadows of forgotten ink. The old libraries burned, yet their ashes became the soil where new stories were written. Every map drawn, every chronicle copied, every cathedral designed was a small act of choosing. What to include, what to erase, what to rename, so that the story of the world would always lead back to Rome. The monks were the first guardians of this secret craft. Their monasteries were quiet fortresses of parchment and silence. They copied texts from every culture, but only after cleansing them of what they called corruption. Symbols of the sea, stars arranged in patterns not approved by the church, names that hinted at the drowned world, all carefully removed. Some manuscripts show faint knife marks where lines were scraped away. Others have entire sections painted over with gold leaf. The act was holy, they said. The word of God must not mix with the whispers of Atlantis. Yet, in the margins of some Bibles, you can still see tiny drawings of spirals, tridents, and eyes surrounded by circles of stars. The hand that erased also remembered. The masons built in stone what the monks preserved in text. Across Europe, from France to England, they raised cathedrals aligned with the stars, using proportions older than any Roman record. The sacred geometry of Atlantis lived in their arches and rose windows. They said they built for the glory of heaven, but their measurements followed the rhythm of tides, not the rules of Rome. To most people, these were just churches. To those who knew, they were monuments of memory. Every angle, every ratio whispered a story of the sea kings, a code hidden in plain sight. Then came the map makers. They charted the world as it was permitted to be known. Lands were renamed to erase their origins. The Western Ocean became the Atlantic, the Sea of Atlas, a name meant to bury the real one beneath myth. Maps from the 12th century show islands that appeared, then vanished in later editions. Whole regions labelled terra incognita, unknown land, even though older charts had shown them clearly. Knowledge was rewritten until it fit a story of progress that always began in Rome and ended in the church. But not every hand obeyed. Some monks left secret letters inside bindings. Some masons carved symbols where no bishop would look. Some cartographers traced faint coastlines under the ink, ghost maps of the world that once was. They could not save Atlantis, but they could plant its memory like seeds, hidden in stone, in parchment, in compass lines that still point to the deep. The architects of memory did not destroy the truth. They built around it, so that one day, when the silence breaks, the story will still be there, waiting to be read. Most wars are fought with swords, but the quietest ones are fought with calendars. Control the flow of time, and you control memory itself. Rome learned that early. When armies could no longer conquer by land, they began to conquer by counting. The first calendar reforms were said to fix the seasons, to bring order to chaos. But every change also rearranged history. Days disappeared, years were renamed, and entire centuries shifted in the silence of ink. The story we call time was edited until no one could tell what had really happened or when. The Julian calendar began as a promise of order, yet even that order served power. In the year 46 before Christ, Julius Caesar declared the longest year in human history, 445 days. He said it was to correct drift, but some scholars later whispered that it was to erase a season of loss, a naval disaster off the Pillars of Hercules. Ancient letters mention a fleet sent west, one that never returned. Its name was wiped from the ledgers during the Reform. The battle that marked its end sits now inside the fog of what historians call the lost century, a stretch of years where nothing remarkable was recorded. Centuries later, the Church inherited the Roman system and refined it into what we now know as the Gregorian calendar. It was presented as science, a necessary correction. 10 days vanished overnight in October of 1582. People woke up and found that time itself had skipped forward. The Church said it was only to realign Easter with the spring equinox, but the records show more than astronomy at work. Certain feasts and anniversaries tied to older sea cults were erased in that gap. A handful of historians even noticed that maritime logs from the Atlantic were confiscated that same month, their entries rewritten to match the new timeline. The ocean did not lose days, people did. Behind the calendar's perfection lies a kind of censorship. When dates no longer match the stars lose their voice. Chronology becomes a cage. Imagine a battle that truly happened, where Rome met an unknown navy under strange skies. If you cannot place the date, you cannot prove the event. It dissolves into myth, into Atlantis, into the story that never was. Time becomes a tool of victory. Rome didn't just defeat enemies, it scheduled them out of existence. Even today, historians speak of phantom years. Some argue that 2 or even 3 centuries of early medieval history may never have occurred, that they were inserted to align prophecy with power. If that is true, then our entire timeline might rest on an illusion, a carefully tuned lie that keeps the memory of a forbidden war out of reach. The conquest of time was Rome's greatest invention. You cannot rebel against what you cannot remember. Each missing day is a stone in the wall of silence. Somewhere in those lost years, between erased moons and vanished battles, lies the truth that connects the empire to the sea. A truth hidden not in ruins or relics, but in the ticking heart of every clock. There are maps that tell stories the world was never meant to hear. Not the ones displayed in museums, clean and precise, but the ones hidden in drawers, stained by salt and candle smoke. In the late 14th century, long before satellites and sonar, cartographers drew the oceans like memories. Among those maps, called portolans, a few have survived that do not fit the accepted world. They show islands that should not exist, and coastlines that dip into what is now the open Atlantic. One of these maps, found in an old monastery near Lisbon, bears a strange note in Latin along its edge. Vae maris gentium. The roads of the sea people. The parchment is fragile, the ink faded, but under infrared light, faint outlines appear beneath later drawings. They reveal a continental shelf larger than anything near Europe, a landmass stretching between the Azores and the Caribbean. Some scholars once dismissed it as artistic imagination, a mistake of scale, but the accuracy of the stars and currents drawn on the same sheet tells another story. Whoever made it understood navigation beyond the reach of medieval Europe. The coordinates match modern undersea ridges, places where sonar has since found stepped formations, too regular to be natural. The heresy of the cartographer was not that he drew the world wrong, but that he drew it too honestly. The monks who preserved his work centuries later noticed the danger. The label, Roads of the Sea People, was carefully crossed out and replaced with meaningless numbers. The cartographer's name was erased, and the portolan was locked away. Yet copies of his designs survived, passed quietly among sailors and scholars who sensed there was more beneath the waves than myth. During the 16th century, when explorers returned from the New World, they spoke of ancient stone foundations on islands that should have been uninhabited. The patterns of those stones mirrored the grid on the old portolan. When questioned, some of them said they felt as if they were following invisible routes, lines of current and starlight that pulled their ships west, even when the wind was against them. They called them the old roads of the deep. One Jesuit scholar, who studied the portolan in 1783, wrote that the map seemed to belong to two timelines at once. In his private notes, he compared it to the suppressed calendar of Rome, suggesting that the missing years might hide the fall of an oceanic civilization. He called this civilization the Atlanteans, borrowing the name from Plato but hinting that the truth was older still. His manuscript was seized, and the map was declared apocryphal. Yet, the strange thing about maps is that they never truly die. Even when burned, their memory lingers in the hands of those who draw again. Every new chart carries traces of the last, ghost lines that refuse to vanish. Somewhere beneath the modern coordinates, the drowned continent still whispers through the ink. The cartographer's heresy was simple. He believed the sea still held roads, and that if you followed them long enough, they would lead not to the edge of the world, but to the beginning of history itself. In the ruins that sleep beneath the Atlantic silt, divers have found fragments of something that should not exist. Bronze rings fused with crystal, channels cut through stone in patterns too precise for primitive tools, and symbols that seem to shimmer when struck by light. The discovery raised one question no historian could answer. What kind of civilization could shape matter with such grace? The answer, whispered by those who dared to study it, was Atlantis, and the devices they built were not weapons, but engines of light. The recovered diagrams show a technology that defies our understanding of the ancient world. Water, sound, and starlight flowing together as if they were one element. Circles nested within circles, designed to harness vibration and reflection. When replicas were built on a small scale, they produced faint humming tones, a resonance that made water ripple and dust rise into swirling shapes. Some said the machines worked by channeling the natural frequencies of the earth itself. Others believed they converted light into force, using crystals to amplify solar energy through sound. Whatever their true nature, Rome did not see wonder, it saw danger. Records from early imperial decrees mention artifacts seized from the Western Sea, described as instruments of unnatural motion. The Senate forbade their study, calling them sorcery and declaring them property of the state. A letter attributed to Pliny the Elder warns that certain relics sang when touched by flame and could cause madness. The empire collected them, stored them, and then erased all mention of their existence. When the church rose centuries later, those same relics reappeared in its vaults, labelled curiosa, objects of temptation. Yet, the design of the engines never vanished completely. It lived on in hidden geometry. The domes of early cathedrals echo the same curvature found in the Atlantean schematics. Aqueducts built in the 2nd century follow wave patterns identical to those etched on recovered plates. Even the great mirrors of Roman lighthouses used polished alloys similar to the fragments pulled from the sea. The empire did not destroy the knowledge. It absorbed it, stripped of its meaning, recast as architecture and ritual. One Renaissance scholar, Giordano Bruno, hinted at this connection in his writings. He spoke of machines that could gather light as prayer gathers faith, of a music that could move stars. He was condemned for heresy and burned in the year 1600. His notes vanished with him, though a later monk described finding a page filled with sketches of concentric rings surrounding a single phrase. Lux est memoria, light is memory. Perhaps that is why the engines frightened Rome. They did not promise power over others. They promised power within. To remember through vibration, to see light not as a thing but as a truth. If Atlantis mastered that, then their fall was not a natural disaster. It was silenced by those who could not control it. The engines of light remain buried, sleeping like the conscience of the world, waiting for someone brave enough to listen to the hum beneath the ocean and remember what it once meant to be truly awake. At the edge of the known world, where the Mediterranean meets the Atlantic, two civilizations once faced each other beneath a blood-red sky. The Romans called it the Strait of Hercules, but older tongues called it the Pillars, the gates between worlds. It was there, according to fragments buried in forgotten archives, that Rome met an enemy it could not explain. A navy that moved without wind, that rode without rhythm, that glowed faintly blue when the moon rose. Bronze-oared triremes, guided not by compass, but by stars. The Sea Kings had returned, and history would never record their name. The story survives only in pieces. A weathered inscription found near Cadiz speaks of ships of fire and thunder that emerged from the west. Roman mariners described waves that shimmered with light and hulls, so polished they reflected the heavens. Some said the enemy's sails were woven from glass, others that their ships made no sound but a deep, steady hum, like the earth itself was singing. The battle that followed was unlike anything Rome had seen. Archers loosed flaming arrows that fell harmlessly into the sea, as if the water swallowed flame. The Sea Kings fought with mirrors and sound. Witnesses wrote of horns that split the air, scattering flocks and cracking stone. The Romans believed it witchcraft, yet their engineers could not deny the precision of the enemy's formations. They moved with mathematical grace, aligning with the constellations above. One senator later wrote that the enemy sailed by heaven's rhythm, and when the stars changed, so did their course. For a night and a day, the strait glowed with light, then darkness swallowed it all. When dawn came, the Roman fleet was gone, not sunk, gone. Official annals mention a sudden storm that destroyed several ships, a natural disaster, nothing more. But a later account, from a merchant vessel, claimed to have seen fragments of Roman armour scattered across the sea, drifting amid pieces of metal that hummed when touched. The empire ordered silence. No songs, no reports, no honours for the dead. The campaign was erased from the calendar, the records sealed, the witnesses silenced or reassigned to distant provinces. Centuries later, during the construction of a fortress near Gibraltar, workers uncovered massive anchor stones, fused to the seabed with a substance harder than iron. Scholars who examined them in the 19th century claimed they were not Roman. The shape matched no known design, but their measurements aligned perfectly with the constellation Orion as it appeared in the sky during the 1st century before Christ. The builders of those anchors had mapped the stars into the sea itself. If the siege of Pillars truly happened, it was not a simple battle but the last meeting of two philosophies: Rome, the empire of order and control, against Atlantis, the civilization of harmony and light. The victors would decide how the world remembered time, and perhaps that is why the official histories went silent. The empire could not admit that for one night, under a silver moon, Rome met a force greater than its gods, and the sea refused to bow. They say the world ended in a single night. Not the whole world, just the part that dared to stand against Rome. Somewhere beyond the Pillars, beneath the restless Atlantic, the heartland of Atlantis trembled, cracked, and fell. Fire burst from the sea floor. The sky turned red. The waters rose higher than the tallest tower, and by dawn, the island that had once been a kingdom of light was gone. To the Romans, it was divine justice. To the few who survived, it was a silence too heavy to speak of. Geologists today call it a subduction event, a violent shifting of plates deep beneath the ocean, but the old records tell it differently. A philosopher named Marcellus, writing in the 1st century, describes columns of flame from the deep and waves that glowed like molten glass. He says the sea burned, that the smell of sulphur lingered for months, that the sun dimmed for 40 days, and that the survivors spoke of a machine that failed. Some believed Atlantis had angered the gods. Others whispered they had tried to harness the earth's core, and the earth had answered. Rome, watching from afar, saw the chaos as conquest. Messengers returned to the Senate, claiming victory by providence. The enemy had been struck down by nature, and the empire claimed the glory. They built altars to Neptune, minted coins celebrating the taming of the western seas, and turned tragedy into triumph. Yet not a single Roman general dared to admit that their armies had vanished weeks earlier at the Strait. The flood had buried their defeat as surely as it buried the Atlantean cities. When the church rose centuries later, it inherited the silence. The disaster became a parable. Atlantis, they said, was punished for its pride, a warning against knowledge without obedience. The true story, the battle, the machines, the maps, were locked away. In the 5th century, St. Augustine even wrote that some men believed the flood of Noah had been local, that it had drowned an empire of heretics to the west. His writings were carefully edited in later copies, the details softened, the names removed. The idea of a war between Rome and a lost civilization became myth, then rumour, then nothing. But legends remember what history erases. Fishermen along the Azores still tell of nights when the sea glows from beneath, as if cities are burning under the waves. Sonar scans show shapes that should not exist, terraces, domes, and long straight corridors buried under centuries of sediment. In 1948, a submarine crew reported hearing rhythmic pulses deep below the ocean floor, a sound like machinery still running somewhere in the dark. Maybe Atlantis destroyed itself. Maybe the Romans helped it happen. Or maybe the truth is that both powers lost that night, one to water, the other to silence. The empire that claimed victory built its future on a story it dared not repeat. And the church, inheriting its ashes, turned that silence into scripture. The fire became myth, the flood became faith, and the truth, like the city beneath the sea, was left to drown quietly, waiting for someone to dig it back up. After the fire and the flood, the world fell silent, but not everyone was gone. A few of the Atlantean engineers survived, scattered across the coasts of Europe and North Africa, carrying fragments of a civilization no one believed had ever existed. They arrived as refugees, speaking in symbols, drawing in sand what they could not explain in words. They had once built towers of light and bridges of sound, but now they worked with stone and mortar, blending into new societies, hiding their knowledge behind the walls they were asked to raise. What began as survival soon became a covenant, a promise to remember through architecture what the world had been forced to forget. The survivors called themselves Builders of the Line. They believed that if they could preserve the ratios that connected heaven and earth, Atlantis would never truly die. They found work in rising empires, teaching kings how to build fortresses that could withstand both time and tide. In secret, they passed down the old geometries, golden spirals, sacred proportions, the same mathematical relationships once used to channel light through the engines of the deep. Over generations, their descendants became known simply as guilds, bands of craftsmen who seemed to know more than their tools should allow. In the Middle Ages, these guilds evolved into something larger. From the masons of France to the builders of Moorish Spain, a quiet brotherhood began to appear. They claimed no homeland, no written law, only a craft that transcended kingdoms. Each cathedral they built was more than a house of worship. It was a map, a memory carved in stone. The arches mirrored the curve of the earth. The spires pointed to specific stars that marked the path of ancient voyages. The rose windows glowed with ratios that matched the patterns once used in Atlantean energy chambers. To the church, these were miracles of faith. To the builders, they were messages. By the 12th century, whispers spread of lodges where master masons gathered in secret, not just to discuss construction, but to preserve what they called the code of light. Symbols of the compass and square began to appear, not as tools but as signs of alignment between heaven and earth. In cathedrals like Chartres and Notre Dame, the stonework carries hidden numbers, prime sequences, and ratios so precise that modern engineers still struggle to explain how medieval hands could achieve them. The builders said it was not about strength, it was about memory. Every brick was a syllable in a forgotten language, a prayer written in geometry. The church tolerated them, so long as the buildings pointed upward and the sermons remained obedient, but the deeper meaning stayed buried, passed through gestures and silent marks between generations. Over time, the covenant became legend, and the builders became Freemasons. Their original purpose, to guard the memory of a lost civilization, faded behind ritual and secrecy. Yet the symbols remain. In every cathedral, in every compass and stone, the Atlantean ratios still whisper. The covenant of stone still holds, and through it, the drowned architects of light still speak, their message carved not for kings or priests, but for anyone who dares to see that stone remembers what history forgot. In a monastery on the coast of Crete, hidden beneath a cracked mosaic of St. Peter calming the sea, there was once a vault sealed behind a wall. Inside it, monks discovered a set of damp scrolls written in an unfamiliar hand. The ink was faded, the language strange, but one word appeared again and again: Thalassa, the sea. The scrolls were later called the Gospel of Thalassa, and for a brief moment they were studied, whispered about, and quietly banned. The church said they were heretical. Scholars said they were impossible. But the words, what little survived, told a story older than scripture and deeper than myth. The fragments spoke not of sin or salvation, but of light. Not the light of the sun or of heaven, but an inner one, something every living being carried inside. The sea and the soul are mirrors, one line reads. What the surface hides, the depth remembers. Another fragment warns that those who seek power on the land forget the current within themselves. The text calls this inner force the tide, a rhythm connecting all things. To move with it was wisdom, to fight against it was blindness. The followers of Thalassa, it seemed, were not conquerors, but keepers of flow. When historians compared the symbols on the scroll to markings found on submerged ruins near the Azores, they saw the same script. Some began to believe the Gospel of Thalassa was not Christian at all, but Atlantean, copied by early monks who mistook it for an apocryphal text. It described not a kingdom of heaven above, but a kingdom of light within. Its teachings rejected empire, warning that those who tried to rule the sea would drown in their own reflection. Rome could not allow such words to spread. A faith that taught people to look inward did not need priests, temples, or rulers. It needed only silence and stillness. That kind of faith was dangerous. By the 9th century, the gospel vanished. Copies were burned or buried. A single fragment was said to have survived in a private collection in Venice, its owner excommunicated for refusing to surrender it. The church replaced the story of Thalassa with tales of saints who calmed the seas through prayer, rewriting the lesson from reflection to obedience. Yet pieces of the old gospel still echo in unexpected places. Fishermen's hymns that speak of the light beneath the wave, coastal prayers ending with the words, "The sea remembers." Even in the stained glass of certain cathedrals, the spiral patterns resemble the same tide symbols found in the original manuscript. The sea people, the mysterious culture that Rome feared, may have followed this gospel. They sought inner light over empire, harmony over control. To them, divinity was not a throne above, but a pulse inside every tide and heart. The Gospel of Thalassa taught that if mankind ever forgot the sea within, the world would drown again, not in water, but in ignorance. Perhaps that is why it was erased, because it did not promise heaven. It promised awakening. And nothing terrifies a ruler more than a people who remember they carry light of their own. In cathedrals across Europe, angels hold tools no one ever asks about. In the stained glass of Chartres, one carries a compass. In the carvings of Reims, another grips a square. These are not the weapons of heaven or the symbols of miracles. They are the instruments of builders, surveying tools, instruments of measurement. To most visitors, they are harmless details, decorative flourishes meant to show divine order. But when you trace the patterns of where those angels appear, when you connect the churches they inhabit, something begins to emerge. A map, a blueprint of light and stone that follows the stars. Every cathedral is built on a line, an invisible thread connecting its foundation to the heavens. The compass-bearing saints are not just decoration, they are markers. Their positions often face constellations that rise only on certain dates. The Cathedral of Chartres aligns perfectly with the star Spica on the spring equinox. Notre Dame in Paris mirrors the constellation Virgo, its towers matching the points of her crown. Even smaller parish churches, far from royal cities, fit into this web. Someone, long ago, was building with more than stone. They were charting the earth as a reflection of the sky. Art historians have long said that medieval builders used the compass as a symbol of divine creation, that God measured the universe with perfect geometry. But what if the opposite is true? What if the builders were using sacred imagery to hide something practical, something forbidden? In the margins of a 12th century monk's sketchbook found in the Abbey of Saint Denis, there is a strange drawing. It shows a winged figure holding a compass over a sphere, with lines connecting 7 points. Next to it, the Latin words read, "As above, so below." That phrase would later appear in alchemical texts, but here it was carved centuries earlier, embedded in faith. When modern researchers overlaid the locations of these churches on a map of the night sky from the year 1000, the alignment was uncanny. The pattern traced the Milky Way across Europe. Each cathedral corresponded to a star in the band of light. Some scholars dismissed it as coincidence. Others saw intent. The builders, descendants of the Atlantean covenant, had turned faith into a disguise for astronomy. They encoded their knowledge into art that no priest could condemn because it wore the face of angels. The compass and square were once the tools of engineers who shaped water, sound, and light. By placing them in the hands of saints, the builders ensured their memory would survive under the church's gaze. Even when Rome forbade pagan geometry, the symbols remained, hidden behind halos and hymns. The faithful prayed to them without realizing they were standing on diagrams of the cosmos. Perhaps that is the greatest secret of the cathedrals. They were not built to reach heaven, but to remember it. Their floors trace orbits. Their arches echo frequencies. Their towers point not to God, but to the stars that once guided a vanished empire. And every angel with a compass is not a messenger of heaven, but a reminder from Atlantis, carved in glass and light, that knowledge can hide even in holiness. It began quietly, not with fire or war, but with ink. In the 4th century, when the last whispers of the Sea Kings still lingered in old stories, Rome declared a new mission. Every word, every record, every script must speak the same tongue. Latin would become the empire's single language, pure, controlled, and approved. The scribes called it unification. But behind the noble idea of clarity was something colder. Standardization meant erasure. Anything that didn't fit the new form of Latin was rewritten, translated, or simply removed. And in that slow, deliberate act, entire worlds vanished. The Sea Kings had been remembered as explorers, navigators of both water and light. But as the church grew in power, their image changed. The Mare Reges became demons, spirits of pride and rebellion. Ancient songs once sung by sailors became exorcisms. Maps that showed western islands were redrawn with blank spaces. In the margins of one surviving Roman text, a scribe added a note beside a reference to those beyond the pillars. The note reads, "They are cursed." Over time, the word for the Western Sea itself, Thalassa, was rebranded as a place of punishment, the deep from which no soul should return. The purge was subtle, not a bonfire of knowledge, but a slow bleaching of meaning. Libraries were reorganized. Scrolls that spoke of strange stars or drowned lands were moved to restricted sections or labeled mythological. Translators replaced Atlantean names with Roman ones, claiming the cities had been ports of the empire that simply fell to storms. Archaeological evidence was later explained away as remnants of trade routes or collapsed colonies. And when students asked about the lost lands once said to lie beyond the Western Sea, they were told the same thing: legends, fables, dangerous curiosities. By the 7th century, even the memory of the language that carried these stories was gone. Latin became the gatekeeper of thought. Its new form was not the clear, practical Latin of Rome's engineers, but an ecclesiastical Latin, heavy with ritual and mystery. Only the clergy could read it fluently, which meant only they could decide what words meant. The ancient idea that knowledge should belong to everyone was inverted. Now, to learn was to obey. To question was to sin. But in old manuscripts, beneath layers of correction, faint traces remain. A scratched out line here, a faded symbol there, the mark of a compass beside a word for sea. Scholars studying these palimpsests found that the original texts beneath the Latin were written in an older tongue, one that resembled no known dialect of Europe, a language built on rhythm, geometry, and sound. Some say it was the last written echo of Atlantis before the purge scrubbed it clean. The memory purge didn't just destroy stories, it rewired the past. It taught generations to forget that Rome had ever faced a rival worthy of fear. The Sea Kings became demons, the engineers became sorcerers. The cities of light became drowned ruins, and the empire's victory became eternal, not because it conquered truth, but because it buried it beneath the weight of rewritten words. In the year 192, during the reign of Emperor Commodus, Rome issued an edict so strange that even the scholars who copied it did not understand what it meant. The decree forbade the making or possession of something called astral hydrals. The text described them as devices that joined the motions of water and stars, machines of forbidden art. At first, the order seemed insignificant, one more law among thousands, but the penalty was severe: confiscation, then silence. Anyone caught building or studying such mechanisms disappeared from the record. No trial, no exile, only absence. It was the empire's second silence. The term astral hydrals appeared nowhere else. For centuries, historians assumed it referred to some form of musical instrument, perhaps a type of water organ. But the fragments, discovered in shipwrecks near the western Mediterranean, tell a different story. Brass tubes fused with quartz lenses, channels shaped to direct light through running water, and gears small enough to rival modern clockwork. When reconstructed, these fragments produced faint harmonic tones and projected light in patterns that matched constellations. The ancients had built a device that turned the movement of the heavens into sound. It was not entertainment, it was science beyond its age. Reports from that period mention a group of engineers in Alexandria who claimed to have rediscovered the Atlantean principle of resonance, using water to amplify cosmic frequencies. They built fountains that sang, and domes that glowed with shifting colours when the planets aligned. The emperor's advisors, fearing unrest and heresy, declared the work unnatural. Within months, the workshops were closed, the devices dismantled, and the inventors vanished. The archives that once recorded their names were later rewritten under Christian rule. Only the edict survived. By the 4th century, the idea of water and starlight working together was branded as witchcraft. Statues of Neptune were defaced, and scholars who studied celestial mechanics were forced to recite prayers before presenting their findings. The instruments of knowledge had become symbols of sin, yet the memory of the astral hydrauls lingered in secret. In monasteries, monks copied old diagrams under the guise of musical study. In the shadows of cathedrals, masons carved wave-like spirals into columns, a quiet rebellion against the empire's silence. The church later claimed that such devices never existed, that the ancients only imagined them. But legends in North Africa and southern Italy tell of underground chambers where water still flows through bronze channels, humming softly as it moves. Travellers in the 17th century wrote of wells that produced strange echoes when the stars rose, as if the earth itself were remembering a lost frequency. Rome's second silence was not about heresy, it was about control. To measure the stars through water was to see the universe as living, breathing, and connected. The empire could not allow that idea to spread. Knowledge that unified heaven and earth threatened every throne built on division, so they buried it beneath law, beneath faith, beneath time. The astral hydrauls were dismantled, their makers erased, their sound muted. But deep below, in the dark chambers of forgotten aqueducts, some say the music still plays, waiting for the world to remember how to listen. In the dusty archives of the Capitoline Hill, buried beneath centuries of revisions, lies a naval record that should not exist. It is a roster of admirals who never officially served, their names struck through in red ink, their campaigns erased. Yet, when these lost Roman names are compared to inscriptions found on submerged ruins near the Azores, they match almost perfectly with Atlantean captains. The same titles, the same victories, the same sea routes. Only the dates are different. The empire, it seems, did not just conquer the sea, it rewrote who had ruled it first. The record begins in the reign of Augustus, describing a campaign called Mare Ultimum, the Final Sea. 12 admirals are listed, each credited with exploring or securing new routes beyond the Pillars of Hercules. The strange part is that their supposed victories correspond exactly with those carved into the stone tablets pulled from the ocean floor. Only those carvings date centuries earlier. One tablet names a commander called Ariston, Lord of Currents. The Roman copy calls him Aristonius, prefect of the Western Fleet. Even the phrase Lord of Currents appears, translated into Latin as Dominus Fluminum. The coincidence is too exact to be chance. For historians, this anomaly was uncomfortable. Rather than confront it, they explained it away. Scribes made mistakes, myths overlap, but the deeper you look, the stranger it becomes. A battle described as the Siege of the Twin Islands appears twice in 2 different centuries. The Atlantean version speaks of defending light towers that guided ships through storms. The Roman version claims the towers were lighthouses built by Caesar's engineers. Both versions end with the same line: the sea swallowed the victors. one civilization recorded loss, the other turned it into triumph. A forgotten scholar from the 18th century named Lorenzo de Rossi spent his life comparing naval inscriptions from Rome and the Mediterranean islands. Before his death, he wrote that the Roman navy had absorbed Atlantean history into its own records, line by line, century by century. He called it the Phantom Admiralty, a shadow fleet of names borrowed from the drowned. Soon after his manuscript was sent to the Vatican for review, it disappeared, along with the author himself. Only a fragment remains, a page where he scrawled, "Rome did not defeat Atlantis. It became it." In the following centuries, the Roman fleet's victories multiplied, battles with no witnesses, campaigns with no survivors. Entire expeditions recorded only in marble plaques and never in letters or journals. It was as if the empire had invented its own mythic navy, using Atlantean memory as its foundation. The oceans became Rome's mirror, reflecting what it wanted to see. Today, underwater archaeologists continue to find anchors, hull fragments, and inscriptions that predate Roman navigation, but carry Latin names. Tools of empire, stamped on technology that should not exist for another 1,000 years. The Phantom Admiralty lives on, half history, half ghost story, proof that the sea keeps better records than men. The waves may erase cities, but not truth. Beneath every Roman crest, beneath every victory carved in stone, there lingers another story, an older one, written in salt and silence, waiting to rise again with the tide. In the heart of Chartres Cathedral, the labyrinth is more than a path for pilgrims. Its stone twists and turns are not just for meditation. From above, the floor forms a map, a miniature of coastlines and islands submerged beneath the Atlantic long before Rome laid claim to the seas. Scholars who studied the labyrinth noticed something peculiar. On the day of the summer solstice, when the sun reached its zenith, a single beam of light passed through the rose window and fell exactly on a set of carved islands near the centre. The pattern repeated every year, as if the cathedral itself remembered a world that no longer existed. The medieval builders were careful. Every line, every curve was precise. The spiral that seems to guide the pilgrim inward also traces channels that match ocean currents recorded on Atlantean charts. Stone ridges echo the shape of submerged mountains. Pilgrims walk the labyrinth, unaware that their steps follow routes once travelled by bronze-oared triremes, vessels that the Romans later claimed to have discovered on their own. The cathedral becomes both sanctuary and archive, holding knowledge encoded in shadow and sunlight. The noonlight moves slowly, hour by hour, across carved features that appear at first glance to be abstract. Only on the solstice does it illuminate the full archipelago. For one brief moment, the drowned realm speaks, not through words or ink, but through geometry and celestial alignment. The effect is mesmerizing. The light seems to shimmer on the stone as if it were water, and for centuries, those few who noticed could have interpreted it as divine intervention. But the builders knew better. It was memory, not miracle, that they were preserving. Some of the labyrinth's patterns extend beyond the floor. Capitals on the surrounding columns carry spirals and wave-like carvings, repeating the map in miniature. Angels with compasses hold their tools at angles that mirror the lines of the labyrinth. The same ratios appear in the windows, the vaulting, and even the placement of the bells. Every detail reinforces the memory of a world lost to water. The sun, guided through stained glass, touches these points with perfect timing, like a reminder that time itself is a witness. Visitors in the 18th century recorded the event in diaries, but the notes were obscure. They described lights that danced across the floor, islands appearing in stone, and an uncanny sense that the cathedral was speaking to them. Scholars dismissed it as coincidence or superstition. Only recently, with computer simulations and laser mapping, have researchers realized the precision of the alignments. The labyrinth was never random. It was a clock, a map, and a monument all in one. The bells of Chartres, placed high above, chime at noon and create vibrations that echo through the labyrinth. Some believe the sound resonates with the layout, activating the memory of the drowned lands. The effect is subtle, almost imperceptible, but powerful. It is a whisper of Atlantis, hidden in plain sight, preserved in stone and light for anyone patient enough to notice. For centuries, the church ignored it, or perhaps simply did not understand it. The labyrinth remembers, the sun remembers, and for one moment every year, the drowned realm calls to those who still know how to see. In the quiet chambers of Europe's hidden societies, two symbols appear again and again. One is a cross, simple, precise, a reminder of the world above. The other is a trident, sharp, three-pronged, a mark of the deep. The rosy cross and the trident are not decorations or badges of rank. They are memory, a story encoded in shape and ritual, passed from master to initiate. Those who carry them do not speak the tale aloud. They learn it silently, as if by intuition, absorbing a history that the rest of the world has forgotten. The cross represents dominion over land, over the cities, and over the empires that rise and fall with the passing of centuries. It reminds initiates that surface power is visible, recorded, and celebrated. Every cathedral carved with roses, every painted cross in a monastery, carries the faint echo of ancient Atlantean geometry, disguised as faith. Those who know how to read the proportions can see it, a lattice of knowledge that survives under the guise of devotion. The trident, by contrast, points to what is hidden. It is the memory of the drowned realm, the Atlantean heartland lost to fire and flood. Its three prongs mirror the three great currents that once guided bronze-oared ships through the Atlantic. In some manuscripts, it appears alongside cryptic diagrams, maps that make no sense to the casual observer, yet reveal a network of islands, light machines, and resonant waterways to those who understand. To the initiate, it is a reminder that true knowledge flows below the surface, unrecorded by historians, erased by empires, yet preserved in symbols. The story without a name is learned in fragments. A lecture here, a ritual there, a pattern in a rose window noticed during a solstice. Each piece alone seems incomplete, almost meaningless. But the symbols, the cross for the world above, the trident for the world below, bind the fragments into memory. Initiates are trained to see patterns, to follow currents, to read stone and glass as texts. They are taught that understanding comes not from books, but from recognition, from knowing where the missing pieces might be hidden. The rosy cross and the trident also serve as warnings. Those who misuse the knowledge, who attempt to wield it for power rather than understanding, risk being lost to history themselves. Ancient orders recorded the names of their mistakes in secret ledgers. Some vanished, some reappeared under false identities, and some became saints or scholars whose true learning was buried beneath layers of sanctioned history. The symbols themselves are memory insurance. They encode what cannot be written plainly. Throughout the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, these twin signs appeared in surprising places, carved into cathedral spires, etched into gilt seals, hidden in illuminated manuscripts. Few noticed, fewer understood, but the message endured. The rosy cross teaches the world above, the trident preserves the knowledge below. Together, they whisper of a war that reshaped empires, of a civilization that taught the earth and sea to speak, and of a story the church never named but could not fully erase. And to those who see them both, the full map slowly comes into focus, revealing a past that waits patiently beneath the layers of memory and silence. In the year 784, a Roman scholar named Marcus Valerius observed an eclipse over the Strait of Gibraltar and recorded it in meticulous detail. He described the moon crossing the sun, casting shadows over the bronze-oared ships that patrolled the waters beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Centuries later, when modern astronomers calculated the event, the sky did not match his record. The eclipse should have occurred, but it had not. The stars themselves seemed to contradict the official history. Marcus's careful observation became a problem. By the 9th century, scholars who tried to reconcile celestial events with Roman naval campaigns found themselves in danger. Monastic overseers demanded that parchment always take precedence over sky. The heavens could not dispute history. A letter from the abbot of a monastery near Ravenna reads, "Trust the written word. The stars mislead the unworthy." Scholars were forced to alter calculations, adjust dates, and suppress reports that suggested battles occurred at times inconsistent with imperial records. Even the simplest correction could be interpreted as heresy. Eclipses, comets, and planetary alignments are natural clocks. They cannot lie. They mark time with precision, revealing the position of the Earth in relation to the Sun and Moon. Yet, when these celestial events clashed with the accounts of Roman admirals or Atlantean captains, the scholars were silenced. Astronomical tables were redrawn to match the story Rome wished to tell. Manuscripts were recopied, with dates shifted. Battles reassigned to emperors who never commanded them. Victories given to admirals who had no fleet. The sky's testimony was buried beneath ink. A cryptic report from the Vatican in 1293 mentions a celestial disagreement concerning the Battle of the Twin Islands. Observers noted that the sun and moon did not align as the annals claimed. The document orders that all future recordings must conform to precedent. Eclipses are to be noted but ignored in judgments of history. It is one of the earliest instructions to place parchment above the cosmos itself. Scholars whispered among themselves that the heavens were being put on trial. In later centuries, astronomers such as Giovanni Cassini and Johannes Kepler noticed inconsistencies in medieval records. They realized that eclipses were listed at incorrect years, and that some comets appeared in documents decades before or after they were observed. Letters from Kepler indicate frustration. He wrote that the records were twisted to please emperors and priests, not the gods or the stars. Attempts to publish these findings met resistance. The Church held the archives, controlled access, and censored interpretations. Even today, when computer simulations reconstruct the sky from the first millennium, discrepancies appear. Battles recorded as decisive events align with nothing. Eclipses mentioned in chronicled victories cannot be found. The stars remember what humans attempted to forget. They testify to campaigns of Atlantis, to bronze-oared triremes guided by stellar sextants, to a war that official annals deny. The sky has not agreed to Rome's silence. Scholars are left with a choice: trust parchment and obedience, or trust the stars and risk the consequences. And for those who pay attention, the heavens whisper truths that the archives were built to conceal. Beneath the polished marble floors of the Apostolic Archive lies a place that few dare to speak of. Whispers call it the Black Vault, a chamber hidden behind iron doors and layers of bureaucracy, a room that even the Pope is not guaranteed to enter. Inside, rumours say, lie sealed cases labelled Mare Internum Bellum. The name is Latin, simple enough to translate as the War of the Inner Sea, but the meaning is far from clear. Some claim it holds the Atlantean campaigns, manuscripts, and diagrams Rome wished erased. Others insist it contains maps of a world older than recorded history, devices of water and light, and the names of those who challenged the empire's silence. Access to the Black Vault is controlled by a group known only as the Custodians of Silence. Their origins are murky, stretching back centuries, perhaps to the very first monks who copied Atlantean knowledge in secret. They, alone, hold the keys, literal and metaphorical, sworn to keep whatever lies inside from the eyes of the unprepared. An archivist who worked in the lower levels in the 1950s wrote in coded letters that the custodians did not even speak of the chamber to outsiders. Only rituals, gestures, and encrypted ledgers determined access. Stories of the Black Vault appear sporadically in the margins of Vatican correspondence. One letter from the year 1587 mentions a chest sealed with 6 locks, each key held by a different custodian. Another note, dated 1941, warns that even examining a single case without permission could bring death or exile. Scholars have long speculated that these were exaggerations, cautionary tales to protect mundane documents. But fragments of Atlantean maps, recovered secretly in the 20th century, suggest otherwise. The chamber may be real, and its contents more extraordinary than anyone dares admit. What is so dangerous that it must be hidden in reinforced cases? Some accounts describe texts written on metal plates, their ink resistant to fire and water, detailing fleets that sailed before Rome, machines that harnessed starlight, and coordinates of lands long submerged. Others speak of instruments that could measure time in ways our calendars cannot, charts that connect constellations to currents, and diagrams of Atlantean architecture encoded with knowledge the Church could not allow to spread. Scholars who glimpsed sketches in the archives were forbidden to retain them, and some disappeared soon after. The Black Vault is not merely a storage room. It is a monument to memory, a safeguard of history that Rome tried to erase. It is said that during certain alignments of the stars, a faint light can reach the door, illuminating the labels of the cases, casting shadows that resemble maps of islands no longer on any chart. The custodians of silence guard these shadows as carefully as they guard the manuscripts themselves. The chamber is a testament to the lengths power will go to control what is remembered and what is forgotten. To enter the Black Vault is to confront centuries of secrecy. To touch the cases is to risk knowledge the world is not prepared for. And yet, for those who believe in Atlantis, for those who search for what Rome tried to bury, the vault represents hope. Hope that the drowned realm, the sea people, and their forgotten war might one day speak through the silence, through the locks, through the custodians themselves. The Black Vault waits. The questions it holds are louder than any official denial. In the year 1963, a dying Monsignor whispered a confession to a young archivist in the dim light of a private chamber within the Vatican. He had served in the lower archives for decades, a keeper of documents no one else could access, and he knew what lay beyond the sealed doors. With trembling hands, he revealed that the Church had preserved fragments of Atlantean technology, not to study them, not to understand them fully, but because the power they represented was dangerous without guidance. Entire libraries of sketches, designs, and mechanical diagrams had been locked away, carefully curated to leave only what could be controlled. He described blueprints etched on bronze plates, copper sheets, and vellum that showed water-powered engines, sound resonators, and machines that captured starlight. The Church feared what would happen if knowledge like this fell into the wrong hands. In his youth, he had seen experiments fail. Constructs that could have illuminated cities or altered tides were dismantled or buried because the moral framework to wield them responsibly did not exist. The fragments preserved were meant as warnings, examples of genius bound by restraint. The rest, the vast majority, were consigned to oblivion. The Monsignor spoke of councils held in secret chambers, men in cassocks debating the balance of power and knowledge. Atlantean devices were not just inventions, they were embodiments of principles the Church could not ignore. Energy drawn from sound and light could heal or harm, raise or sink, depending on the will of the operator. The elders feared that civilization was not ready, that without a moral compass, such technology would bring chaos rather than enlightenment. Thus, the designs were divided, hidden in crypts, and scattered across the archives in misleading locations. He admitted guilt, but also relief. For centuries, the Church had succeeded in keeping the technology out of reach, ensuring that no empire, king, or general could replicate the Atlantean fleets or their waterborne engines. Scholars occasionally glimpsed fragments, sketches that appeared mundane until carefully examined. A drawing of a wheel might be mistaken for a mill, when in truth it was a component of a machine that manipulated tides. The Monsignor had personally overseen some of these decisions, and the weight of secrecy had burdened him every day. He spoke of a final act. Before his death, he had left coded instructions for select archivists, a guide to rediscover the fragments if the world became ready. Not all were meant to survive, but a few were intentionally preserved, scattered in ways that only those trained to see could find. The Church had created a system of controlled memory, a deliberate architecture of knowledge. Power without morality, he said, is a curse. The surviving fragments were an education in restraint as much as invention. When the Monsignor passed, the young archivist held the last confession close, understanding that the Church had not destroyed Atlantean knowledge entirely, but had wielded time and silence as instruments of control. The sketches that remain are whispers of genius, a testament to what was lost, and a warning of what could be gained only when responsibility meets discovery. The confession lingered in the archives long after the Monsignor's voice fell silent, a reminder that even in secrecy, truth waits patiently for the right moment to be revealed. In the year 1998, a team of divers descended into the murky waters off the Azores. They were searching for nothing in particular, just surveying the seabed when their sonar picked up a structure unlike anything mapped before. As they approached, they realized it was a step pyramid, its edges sharp and precise, rising from layers of silt as if it had been sleeping for millennia. The pyramid was massive, wider at the base, with terraces that hinted at chambers below and channels that seemed deliberately carved into the stone. As one diver swam closer, a trail of microbubbles rose from the crevices, tiny pockets of air escaping from a network of channels. It was astonishing. The pyramid seemed to breathe. Sensors revealed the channels were spaced in precise ratios, following phi, the golden ratio, a design principle the Atlanteans had used to harmonize geometry and function. It was no accident. The pyramid was a machine, an engine that had survived the centuries beneath water, pulsing slowly as if the city itself were alive. The divers explored further. Each terrace led to terraces below, forming a labyrinth of conduits and chambers. Water flowed through them in carefully controlled streams, interacting with the vents to generate microcurrents. Instruments attached to the channels detected vibrations, resonances tuned to specific frequencies. This was a system that moved energy, perhaps for light, heat, or even sound. Every part of the pyramid had a purpose. Nothing about it was symbolic alone. Everything was functional and mathematical. Historical accounts had dismissed Atlantean devices as myth, stories of water machines and light engines exaggerated in old scrolls and gossamer tales. Yet here was proof. The pyramid was a testament to a civilization that merged engineering and art, science, and ritual. The machines embedded in the city had not only survived, but continued to operate in the rhythm set by their creators. The Atlanteans had understood principles of physics and resonance that the rest of the world would not rediscover for thousands of years. The divers found chambers lined with bronze plates etched with schematics, diagrams of water wheels, rotating prisms, and reflective pools hinted at energy captured from currents and sunlight. Other engravings mapped the stars and their paths across the oceans. It was a city designed to harmonize with both water and sky, a network that drew from natural forces, not stored fuel. The city itself was alive, a living library of engineering, waiting patiently beneath the waves. Artifacts discovered within the pyramid suggested it had been part of a larger complex, a central hub in a network of Atlantean settlements. Structures, perhaps docks, aqueducts, and smaller pyramids, radiated outward. Channels connected them, forming a lattice that circulated energy, air, and water. It was an ecosystem engineered for longevity, efficiency, and balance. A civilization's wisdom encoded in stone and bronze. The city that breathes challenges everything we thought we knew about Atlantis. It confirms that the machines were never myth, that the Atlanteans did not just dream but built systems capable of sustaining life and knowledge for centuries. And as the divers surfaced, carrying images and measurements, it became clear that the whispers of lost technology, once dismissed as legend, were the echoes of a civilization that had mastered harmony between the natural world and the mind. The city had waited for the right eyes to see, and now it had been found. By the year 2025, scholars, divers, and archivists began noticing patterns that had been invisible for centuries. Maps once thought disconnected, now aligned with star charts, and structures in Europe revealed hidden ratios echoing those found beneath the waves. The war between Atlantis and Rome was never just fought on oceans or through armies. It was fought in memory, perception, and control. Rome may have conquered territory, erected monuments, and written history to its liking, but Atlantis had left a different kind of mark, encoded in stone, in water, and in thought. When we look at the labyrinthine streets of Rome, the precise alignments of cathedrals, and the secret channels beneath old cities, we see a civilization that shaped more than land. Rome shaped stories. The Senate, the historians, and the scribes dictated which victories would be celebrated and which would vanish into silence. Atlantean victories, fleet maneuvers, and hydraulic marvels were removed from chronicles. They existed only in fragments, hints, and diagrams, too subtle for casual observers to decode. The story became Rome's. The truth remained hidden in plain sight. The stars, however, remembered. Ancient astronomers in China, India, and Egypt recorded eclipses, alignments, and tides with precision. When these records are compared to European annals, contradictions appear. Atlantean fleets, guided by stellar sextants, left traces in these independent observations. The heavens acted as witnesses, testifying to events the Roman archives had erased. Atlantean knowledge was never about conquest in the conventional sense. It was about preserving understanding. While Rome controlled memory, Atlantis controlled code. Stone, too, kept secrets. Cathedrals, pyramids, and civic buildings carried ratios, angles, and spirals that encoded information about the sun, moon, tides, and currents. These were not aesthetic choices. They were deliberate, Atlantean methods of transmitting knowledge without words. Those who learned to read the signs could navigate seas, predict cycles, and understand forces invisible to those trained only to obey written decrees. To the untrained eye, these features were art, holy design, or superstition. To the trained, they were instructions, a living record of the war that official texts denied. Memory and story are powerful. When Rome dictated history, generations grew up unaware of the Atlantean achievements hidden beneath their feet and waters. Scholars who questioned the official accounts were silenced, manuscripts rewritten, and artifacts buried or mislabeled. But Atlantis had encoded survival in forms that could not be destroyed by ink, decree, or fire. Machines pulsed in the deep. Ratios resonated in stone. Star alignments recorded events beyond human narrative. Atlantis had trusted that memory could be preserved differently than story. Today, when divers map step pyramids, when archivists find erased entries, and when historians cross-reference celestial data, Atlantis's voice begins to re-emerge. The war that Rome won on paper and in monuments was lost in visibility but survived in subtlety. Maps, stars, and stone converge to reveal a theatre of conflict that no army could truly control. Memory wakes slowly, quietly, and it carries the code the Atlanteans always intended to endure. Perhaps the true lesson of the Atlantean War is not who ruled the sea, or who burned ships and cities, but who controlled perception, and who left the world a key hidden among patterns, waiting for those willing to see, to remember, and to read the story beneath the story. The war between Atlantis and Rome is not over in the way battles are measured. It does not live in broken triremes, scorched coastlines, or vanished cities alone. It lives in memory, in the patterns we fail to see, and in the knowledge buried beneath layers of obedience and silence. The Atlanteans understood that power without understanding could destroy worlds. They hid their secrets, not to dominate, but to teach. The lesson was simple. The greatest empire is the one we carry inside ourselves. A realm of thought, intuition, and light. For centuries, Rome sought to control the story. It named cities, erased names, and recast myths. Monuments and histories were crafted to ensure the Atlantean legacy appeared as legend, as fantasy, as something that had never truly existed. Scholars who glimpsed forbidden texts were silenced. Maps were altered, manuscripts rewritten, entire fleets removed from memory. The church inherited the silence, and through it, generations grew up thinking history was linear, knowable, and fully recorded. Yet beneath that narrative, Atlantis waited, encoded in ratios, vibrations, and star charts, a knowledge that could not be extinguished. To remember is not to rebuild cities or fleets. It is not to claim dominion over oceans or nations. It is to awaken the principles Atlantis left behind. Divers tracing step pyramids, historians finding erased indexes, and architects discovering hidden ratios all participate in this awakening. Each discovery, each pattern recognized, reconnects us to a way of thinking the world has long forgotten. The inner light the Atlanteans taught was never a weapon or a tool for conquest. It was a compass, a guide for perception, understanding, and harmony. The sea within is a metaphor as much as it is a reality. It is the current of memory, the tide of knowledge, and the pulse of wisdom flowing through generations. Every story that was altered, every city renamed, and every fleet removed leaves behind an echo, a subtle signal waiting for someone to recognize it. Atlantean knowledge survives in fragments of maps, in stone laid with precision, in machines that breathe beneath silt, in texts hidden from common eyes. The sea remembers what history tries to forget. Rome's victory was real, but incomplete. It won the story, the monuments, the edicts, and the perception of power. Atlantis, however, preserved the code. Hidden in architecture, in charts, and in whispers of the past, the knowledge of harmony, balance, and inner mastery endures. And now, the invitation is ours. We are the generation that can piece the fragments together, that can read the ratios in stone and water, that can align stars with intention, and remember what was lost in silence. The war ends not with conquest, but with awareness. It ends when we stop relying solely on what we are told and begin to see, feel, and understand for ourselves. Atlantis does not call for empires. It calls for remembrance. It calls for the awakening of the inner sea, the light and knowledge that Rome tried to rename and control. When we heed that call, when we recover the memory, we honor both history and possibility. The sea within is waiting, always, beneath the surface, inside us, in patterns, in breath, in thought. It is the last gift of a civilization erased from paper but never from truth.